Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at the Demco Brake Conversion Kit for a stay and play duo braking system to the Air Force One. And we'll be installing the air system here on a 2022 Thor Aria. So throughout a flat tow vehicle's lifespan, sometimes you end up upgrading either the vehicle or the coach, and that means not everything plays ball. So if you've gone to a larger coach with air brakes, unfortunately the stay and play duo is not going to be working. So instead of taking out the entire system, you can simply buy the conversion, which is going to give you the main unit here, as well as the lines to hook up to the front, your air line, also your fitting here, and also the tank and fittings to hook up to the air supply on your RV. Now this is a pretty simple system, especially if you have everything in place to just kind of cut a few wires. You can utilize a lot of the same air lines already. You will have to run a new one and you will have to tie into your RV, but something also to consider is a lot of newer RVs will already have the tank in place. So something you're going to want to check is to see if you have that fitting on the back of your RV already. And if that's the case, you're going to be in luck. Now, a lot of the installation that we've done is going to be specific to how you've installed your system. It could be very easy, or depending on where you've mounted your module, it could be a little bit tricky. But overall, the premise of swapping everything over is pretty simple. And as far as getting the airline set up on your RV, we have a Freightliner chassis here, so it may look a little bit different. The instruction manuals are really good about letting you know what to do, and if you follow along with ours, you're going to get the basic premise of kind of what you're going to be doing. Now, speaking of that installation, let's take a look at that now. If you flat towed your vehicle and you've had a stay and play duo in place, but you've swapped over to a coach that has air brakes, you are going to have to change out your braking system. And the great part is these play very well together as far as the Air Force One and the stay and play duo. So converting it over to be able to run from air brakes isn't that difficult. So we're going to utilize a lot of the same stuff from the Stay and Play's original installation, so this should be pretty easy on our car side. Now obviously there's going to be a tank that we're going to have to tie into the RV, which I can show you a little bit later, but let's go ahead and get our Air Force One started to be installed. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can't take our old unit off and mount it up in the same exact spot, and that way we have all of our wires and air fittings right there for us. Now, depending on where your stay and play is mounted up, this could get obviously a little bit tricky if you got crafty as far as hiding it. The main thing is all of our connections have to go into that main unit, and the Air Force One is actually a little bit smaller. It's about the same length, and it's definitely got a smaller footprint. So wherever your stay and play was mounted before, your Air Force One will fit. So get yours taken out, and when it comes to cutting our wires, I'll show you that, but the main thing is get your unit loose and get it out of the way so we can get our Air Force One in. So I've got this taken off to where it's not mounted up anymore, and what we're going to do is start transferring our air lines first. So our push connect fitting here, if you just push on that collar in, you should be able to pull this out. That'll release that locking mechanism. Now we're going to put this directly in on our air out, and this is going to go to our cylinder. So one of our connections is done, and then I'm going to go ahead and get our large vacuum line off. So this already routes over to our booster. I'm going to retain the one-way check valve here. And to get this pried out, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. You can use silicone and kind of just pry this to kind of break it around, or at least break the seal that's on that barb fitting. I can get this end off pretty easily here. So let me get my some tools here, and I'll pry this out. Now we are going to need to attach a little bit of a rubber end, just like we have here, to attach to our barb fitting. So I'll be cutting a little of this just to kind of create a connector. If you have a small pick, sometimes that'll help kind of open this up, and then we can kind of pry on this out. You can also use a flathead and just kind of work at this. It can be a little bit tricky to get these out, especially if they've been on there for a while. There we go. And we're going to want to make sure that we have the black facing towards our main unit here. So as I mentioned, I'm going to cut off a small little section to create our jumper, and I'll be using a tubing cutter here. So just make sure that you have enough to slide on that brass fitting, and also have enough for the edge here on our booster line. So I'm figure about 2 inches or so. Put our one-way check in, and then we can go ahead and reconnect our booster line. We need to tie our 2 wired connections here from our Air Force One into part of the Stay and Play Duo. So using the existing wires, we're going to be tapping one of them into a ground, which the black wire is the system ground of the Stay and Play Duo. So we'll be utilizing that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this and give myself a little bit of extra room here so we can make that connection. And then also the other one needs to attach to the black wire that is off of the breakaway switch. So trace that back and you'll find that the blue wire from your main unit ties into that. So we'll cut the blue wire. Make this connection now. And also, obviously we're going to be taking this unit off. So if you need to, right now you can go ahead and cut the brown wire and the red wire, and we're just going to tape those up for now. And this is going to stay just kind of in place. It's not hurting anything to be here. It's not going to be used obviously anymore. So if you need to, you can go ahead and zip tie that up however you want to get it out of the way. And then I'm going to do the same with our red wire that we have over here. So we'll go ahead, take our Stay and Play Duo main unit and set this aside as we're not going to be using it. Get our black wire and our blue wire stripped back. And I'll be using some heat shrink butt connectors because this is in the engine bay and it could be exposed to water. These are going to be the best way to get a nice watertight seal. Go ahead, get these crimped down, and then with the heat gun, we'll shrink it down. So at this point, we've made our electrical connections. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of tuck this in the existing wire loom that we had here, just kind of clean it up. Now we'll take our extra run of airline tube, and with this, you're going to want a nice clean cut. If you use a set of just normal snips, it can crimp it down and cause it to be more of an almond shape, and that's going to make it to where it's not going to want to seat in that push connect fitting as well. So using a tubing cutter, this makes a nice clean square cut. Once you have that cut made, we will plug this into the air in, and eventually we'll be feeding this down to our front fitting on the front of the vehicle. But we'll have our connections made here. So I'll tie these up, and wherever you find necessary to mount it up, I'm going to be using, the holes don't line up the same, but no worries, I'm able to kind of hide those with the bracket, and I'll just run some quick self tappers in there that are fairly shallow, and that's going to keep that nice and secure. With that extra air line that we have, we're going to route that down to the front where we're going to be putting our connection for our airline fitting. I do recommend, if you plan it out, you're going to want to kind of keep it on the same side as the fitting that's going to be on the RV. That's one less cable that's going across. You can kind of just have a straight shot. So I'm going to route my airline down here, and then we're going to determine the best place to mount up our fitting. As far as getting this ran to the front, a lot of times we'll put all of our components in place when we have the fascia off to put the base plate. So to help you out, if you want to, you can find where your existing wires maybe run up the same path, and you have plenty of airline tube, or you should. So I cut off a section here. I'm going to use this as a fish wire to kind of route this up and see if I can't get this poked through. It seems like it's a little easier than going the other way, and then we can tape this together, pull it through, and then we'll have a clean run. So the main thing is you're not going to have it on any sharp corners. Also, obviously anything that's exhaust or anything that might be a moving part, you don't want to have this damaged. So running along the same kind of lines that we've ran before, clearly this brake system works, so it seems like a safe way. We're going to follow that. I've gone ahead and ran my wire down, or my airline where I want it. I've cut this to a size where I kind of test fitted it on our fitting. So this will be mounted up on our vehicle. So make sure you do have the proper side, as the RV side is going to be a little bit different styled. So I'll go ahead, I'm going to get this pressed in here and then kind of align this up. you want to make sure that it's on a swivel here, so make sure you have enough to where it's not going to kink. If you kink the line, obviously air is not going to be able to go through there. And it does come with the hardware to kind of mount this up without taking a fascia off or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and use some self-tappers. I think that's going to hold this in place just fine. And again, just double check your airline to make sure that it's in a good position. Let's get our other side mounted up now. Our vehicle side should be complete, and we can't test this yet until we hook it up to the air brakes, and we need that air to run through here, and we'll pump the brakes and double check to make sure that it's working. So we're going to head over to the RV side to get our tank set up and tied into those airlines. Now, any extra airline that you cut off from mounting up that, you're going to want to use to hook up the tank on your RV. Now, something that I will point out is the Air Force One, when you buy it as a total kit, will have a cylinder that's a little bit different than what the Stay and Play Duo has, and that's because it has a magnet inside with a reed switch, which that gives you your indicator light. So with this one being a little bit different, on our vehicle today, we'd have to pick up a brake light switch, and this one requires a universal one, which is going to be a laser, and it pretty much does a proximity, and that will illuminate that LED indicator light when those brakes are being applied. So on your vehicle, if you want to maintain that, you are going to want to be able to tap into that either the brake light switch, or you're going to have to pick up a stop light switch if you shut the battery off while towing. It is kind of minor, as that indicator light just kind of lets you know when those brakes are being applied. It's still going to light up with the breakaway switch, but again, if you want to maintain that, you are going to want to look into getting a stop light switch if you don't already have one. As far as getting your tank and all your airlines set up on your RV, the first thing that I do is mount up your fitting, and you're going to see this is a female adapter, should have the larger cap on it, so make sure you have that proper one. And I just went ahead, drilled some holes here, and then used the washers and the hardware included to get that mounted up. Now we're going to just take that extra airline, the 1/4 inch that we have, put it in our push connect fitting, and start routing it up towards where we're going to tie into our supplied and metered air. Now, running our airline up, main thing is follow along the frame rail. You're going to want to stay away from anything hot or potential that could cause damage, and also chafing, something that you're going to want to keep an eye on. So if there's any sharp corners, just make sure that that airline's not going to rub against it long term. So I've just gone ahead, followed my frame rail, and along the way I threw a few zip ties up on some of the factory wire loom just to kind of keep it secure. And it is kind of tucked up here. And then I made my way back. Now on our Freightliner, we do have our tank that we're going to mount up, and I was able to mount it right here. I flipped my bracket, and there was a small arm here that had this sensor attached to it, so I was able to use that to mount it up. It's a little bit tight as far as clearance, but it's pretty solid. And from here, we're going to see that we have 3 fittings that we're going to be attaching to. This is going to be our supply side. This is where our metered air is going to go in, and then this 90 degree is where that line goes back to our fitting. So let's take a look at each of these. On our supplied air, we have our 1/4 inch line that runs up, and that's going to go all the way up to this large diameter green hose. So make sure it's the larger one, and that's where our T is going to tie in. So use a tubing cutter, just as I mentioned before. It's going to make it a lot easier to cut into that. And that line is pretty rigid. It's a little bit tricky to get any movement. So you want to make sure that your cut's perfect enough to where you can get that fitting in. If you're a little bit short, it's going to be tricky. So just take your time on that. And also, once you cut it, you're going to want to take a little bit of brake cleaner, kind of wipe those down. That's going to give it a nice clean surface. That way you don't have any dust, dirt kind of building up in that push connect fitting, which can cause leaks. So that's your supply. That one, as I mentioned, put that T in. And this metered air line, these are, again, push connect fittings, so make sure they're all properly seated. Push them down, make sure they bite in. And this kind of routes up. You'll see a black hose right here. It's a little bit larger diameter. It looks to be about a 3/8. From there, we cut and put our T. And this is going to be the smaller diameter T in line, so very similar to that supplied air. Do the same technique as far as using the tubing cutter and clean that off. And then you can route this line down to the metered air. And then once you've routed your supply, or I'm sorry, the line that goes to the back fitting, that's going to tie in here. So with all those connections made, make sure your tank is obviously tightened down. From there, you can go ahead, start your RV, get air pressure built up, and then once you have the pressure built, you can shut it off and spray everything down. Any connection that you've made, you're going to want to use a soapy water solution, and that's really going to show if there's any small leaks. If you hear air hissing, that's a pretty solid sign that you have a leak, obviously. So your best bet is to take the push connect fitting, try to reseat it and see if that fixes it. But using that soapy water, you're going to get large bubbles filling up or forming around the fitting if you do have air leaks. Now luckily we didn't have any on ours, so at this point we can get our RV down on the ground. We're going to hook up our air cable to our towed vehicle. And that was a look at installation of the Demco Brake Conversion Kit from Stay and Play Duo to Air Force One on a 2022 Thor Aria.